Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is your host, Tom Navolis, and I'm so delighted that you are here with me once again. And right off the bat, what I'd like you to do is, as you can, would you go to samueladamsreturns.net, and you can go to the post on that page and you can see all of the archives, and you can contact me there, as well as get some really good information that we've been talking about, especially regarding this election time. I put up a new post that's out there talking about, do the midterms matter? And we're going to kind of touch on a little bit of the historical references to that today. But you know what? We're going to bring, as we do here at Samuel Adams Returns, those anti-federalists. Yes, they got it right because they were so predictive. They absolutely saw insights into mankind, into who we are as humans, and especially in so many ways where we stand or don't stand before the living God. And that's a critical component of everything that we see going on this very day. The everything from what's happening with the Antifa in Portland, Oregon, and or Antifa, however you want to call them. They're anarchists, they're communist thugs, is what they are. And geez, talking about communist thugs, we have those that are being encouraged by none other than their leader, not Maxine Waters, as the president likes to say, but Hillary Clinton and the rest of that ilk that are promoting what? They're promoting all sorts of domestic terrorist activity. Well, let's step back a little bit as we want to kind of look at the great wins of what happened over the past week with Judge Kavanaugh actually getting on the bench, sitting there, being ceremoniously sworn in, from Saturday night's vote to that on which happened on Monday, and being able to get to work on Tuesday. And talking about events, if you will, yes, this is an absolutely recorded today, in that I am, as Samuel Adams, at Findlay, Ohio, for the Ohio Republican Women's Convention. And so they invited Mr. Adams to come in and talk about the Constitution from his perspective. That will be interesting to report on next week because, as you know, Sam is an anti-federalist, and even some of the leaders of that organization have no clue who a dear friend of his is, none other than Mercy Otis Warren, nor what she wrote in respect to the Constitution as she surveyed it during that period of time as one of the predominant anti-federalists. So that'll be very interesting, as well as they are allowing me to promote my book. That one, as those on the YouTube are seeing, is the from Covenant to the Present Constitution. And, take a look at that. You'll see that also on samueladamsreturns.net. And you'll also find the link there to samueladamsreturns.com, where you can sign up for the various seminars that we do relative to the book. But as we consider what has been happening, I've talked about the educational system for a long time and how broken it is, and to the extent that I am 100% for taking and defunding the majority of the universities, especially the majority of the programs in the universities that are within that realm of indoctrination. There's good programs out there in science. There's good programs out there even in literature to some extent, but mostly we now see a lot of these fluff programs out there that people are spending thousands of dollars and are being forced to be indoctrinated by virtue of attending with their money, and their parents are allowing their young people to become indoctrinated, that I wanted to talk about a hoax, a really interesting hoax that I think is relevant to everything that's going on, because I fully and completely am convinced that the hoax that is played upon us by the democrats is, well thought out, and it's a hoax in that they are, believing so much in themselves and convincing so much of themselves that then they take, and from that ideological perspective, then they perpetrate all sorts of things on the rest of us that are not true. And well, let's take a look at this. This is from the Federalist paper, and it's in the educational section. So it's the Federalist.com, so not the Federalist Papers, but the Federalist.com. And this article, and the link is there so that you can see it both on YouTube, and if you sign up for the promo, you'll get the link there. But this paper is called 3 Academics and 7 Hoax Papers Expose the Western Academia's Deep Corruption. Now, this is written by a graduate student, and the essence of this is that these 3 researchers, these 3 academics, if you will, they decided to get together to show that a lot of what is happening on the college campuses today is, in fact, not only that it is pressing the outcomes within the college campuses, but that it's all nonsensical, and that these people are self or peer reviewing themselves for their own insanities. And we're going to talk about the fact that those insanities are derivatives of a very immoral and anti-God point of view, because there are others that have written about this exact instances of what's going on back in 1811 and prior. And I'm going to touch bases on that in a few minutes. But the interesting aspect is that this writer takes and talks about the biggest prank perpetrated by 3 Anglo-American academics in an attempt to showcase the fraudulent, cancerous disciplines that are spreading within Western academia. In a course of 1 year, they came out with 7 peer-reviewed hoax papers. Get that? 7 peer-reviewed. That means they went into, real journals. So let's see, they're hoax papers, all in feminist, postmodernist, gender and race studies, and sociology journals. In one is quite literally a paraphrase of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf, garbed in a feminist language. So all of that's acceptable within the insanities, the evil perspective, the deep hatred of America that these people in those so-called disciplines, which they're not disciplined whatsoever, they're areas of insanity within the college structure, academia. They're all feminists, postmodernists, gender and racist studies, and sociology journals. Well, I always said, somebody came up, told me one time, and actually read it another time, is that, sociology is where, the science, not really a science, but a study that came about because these people could not get any degrees in statistics and philosophy. So they created this thing called sociology. So very, very interesting. And on top of that, they had to have a level of immorality and godlessness to create sociology. It was kind of an interesting way of, describing what is so profound in the different universities that are out there. So we're going to kind of jump through a little bit, give you some introduction into this thing, because I think it's very telling. And we'll highlight it as we finish up in the next few minutes of this segment and then move on into the next segment as well. But this whole thing started out in 2017 as these academics. There's a Helen Plucros from the United Kingdom and James A. Lindsay and Peter Bogensain from the United States decided to test how rigorous and robust Western social sciences are. And they named their project Grievance Studies. Isn't that interesting? Grievance Studies. I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, their purpose was simple. They wanted to take a look at the ideological section of Western academia that included the studies like women and gender studies, race studies, peace studies, fat studies, post-colonial studies, and so on. And they wanted to know, why are these having the influence in society they are, and what is it that these academics can push? And to the extent that this writer talks about this as academics from cultural and gender studies department these days act as Soviet commissars and decide everything that goes on in the universities. At one time, and as we look back historically, the universities, especially that of Harvard and Yale and Princeton in particular, were led by a Christian, God-fearing, biblical majority. And the whole framework for study, being it math or literature or at that time the arts, was completely looked at from not only the biblical framework, but that classical framework that was of the Greeks and the Romans. And at times they would look at what was in the Middle East and with the Islamics and all of that. But now, all of that is thrown under the bus. It is absolutely trashed. It is being destroyed by people who so much hate, and I use that word very definitively, hate what is anything opposite to their ideology. And to the extent that because the churches pulled out of academia, they pulled out and became perverted at Harvard and Princeton and Yale, that they've left the gap open to these humanists, ungodly, to then determine and become what this author said, Soviet commissars on the campuses in the leadership of the universities in such a way that they decide everything that goes on in the university. Well, it's going to be real interesting as we talk about how these activist departments and what they've been doing over the decades to, decide and speak the languages in the university. And what they do is they make the decisions on the platforms for protest and who's going to speak there and who the different professors are going to come in as and speakers that are going to come in and direct the campuses. I mean, we're seeing it all over. We're seeing it all over with this anti-conservative free speech movements, on the college campuses. Even Catholic and some Christian campuses are not really dealing with the truth of free speech, especially when it comes to constitutional conservatives. So we're going to get into here in this next segment a little bit more of what these 7 papers were. And I'm not going to, get into the details of them, but I'm going to go through the highlights that were given in this article. And then I am going to point you to some of the source. And I may open the next segment, that's what I'm going to do, is something that was written in 1811 that really develops the idea of, wow, nothing new under the sun. Everything that we're experiencing right now is all part of the continuum of battle between evil and good. And quite frankly, God wins. Not just good wins, but God wins because he has in the work of Jesus Christ. So come on back in the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, those anti-federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it right, and they were so predictive in every element of their speech. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And I am today on Liberty Works Radio Network, and they are a fantastic network, and I want to thank them for inviting me to the network, and I much appreciate everything that they do for liberty. So go out and check their website. And, when you can, look on there. It's a listener-funded network, so, jump on in there and help them out. But I want to get back to this whole idea of what is going on at these universities. And as I was saying in the last segment, this particular article that is a hoax by 3 professors on all of these I call them the wacko studies, the socialist, communist, and the author of the article even uses the the communist commissars for these women's studies, these sociologists, and all of these people that are talking about free speech but are absolutely intolerant to the truth of it. So where I see is that these people that are now running the universities, and as I mentioned in the last segment, the universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of them were basically started as solid biblical Reformation places, universities, places of learning to have good, solid pastors come out of there, as well as then great scientists, mathematicians, all of the core meaningful areas of knowledge that we would want to have to enhance our society in all the areas of society. But instead now they're being run by these crazies that are forcing ideologies down the throats of students. But as I said before, and I will always say, there's nothing new under the sun. So here is a pamphlet that was written basically in 1811 by the Reverend Dr. Mason of New York, and he actually pulled out excerpts of an inquiry into the scripture meaning of charity, which was written by John Witherspoon. So when we look at this title is called On Liberality in Religion. And it was taken from the Christian's magazine. And again, it was published in 1811. I just want to open up right here with what the writer has to say. A writer of celebrity has said that where, quote, men are without some fundamental and scientific principles to resort to, they are liable to have their understanding played upon by cant phrases and unmeaning terms of which every party in every country possesses a vocabulary. We appear astonished when we see the multiplied or the multitude led away by sounds. But we should remember that if sounds work miracles, it is always upon ignorance. The influence of names is in exact proportion to the want of knowledge. So, ladies and gentlemen, it kind of is saying what everybody runs around and talks about today. The narrative. The narrative is this. The narrative is that. But it comes into that whole perspective that how are words used? How are they manipulated? How are they redefined? And we see that constantly happening over the course of these last forever. It's forever. Where terminology gets shifted and changed by virtue of those who have an ideology that they want to promote. So they manipulate the language and they redefine terminology, which is common in that language, to the extent then that what do? They now take and create a new reality for everyone. And what he talks about here is that even though they talk about an idea of tolerance, in effect, and in fact, they are the most intolerant. And it just totally, continuously amazes me that those who would call themselves tolerant and expect toleration from everybody else are intolerant. But the fundamental of that, and which he talks about in this paper, is because what they do is they change the whole concept and perspective of what Christianity even means. I read an article this past week where there are now a number of left-leaning, because that's what I'll call them, or I'll call them social gospel, the social justice warrior pastors that are out there, and they're going to go around and have tent meetings, a revival, if you will, against President Trump, against constitutionalism, against the truths of the founding fathers, because you know why? Because they don't understand and refuse to know the truths of the living Word of God. And as Kathy was reading this week, and just go to Romans 1 and you'll find it flat out there that people are deceived to the extent that God turns them over to their reprobate minds. And so when we see all of these, what the pundits call liberals, heads exploding, and all of the other activities that are occurring out there, let's just face it. Face the reality, ladies and gentlemen, that they are in fact turned over by the living God to their reprobate minds. And we have to understand that. And those who understand the biblical Reformation reality of Christianity from Genesis to Revelations, our first objective is to take and pray that they somehow, that God has taken in and a desire to bring them around, or at least a few of them. Other than that, their destiny is the same as Sodom and Gomorrah, and they are there to show to us a reality that there is a living God and how evil can be. And these people are. They're what you saw during the Kavanaugh debate, and even after when he was being sworn in, they're pounding on the doors where he's being sworn in, like the men of Sodom trying to attack those angels that went in to see Lot. I mean, that was the picture that was drawn to my mind. But anyway, let's go ahead and get back to this article that I was talking about, because I thought it was very, very interesting. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, the article is called 3 Academics and 7 Hoax Papers Expose the Deep Western Academia's Deep Corruption. So what we have is all of these activist departments, because that's what they really are. They're ideologically bent. They're in all of these weird studies, as I mentioned in the first segment. You have this thing on women and gender studies, race studies, peace studies, fat studies, post-colonial studies, and on it goes. And what's happening is that these folks have created their own journals, okay? Because the only way that anywhere in academia that you become proof of what is correct, or that you're valued in any way whatsoever, is peer review. Now, here I am. That's, another reason I don't have this thing from University of Virginia sitting up there, because I have no peer review except for you, the listener, and those that watch me on YouTube. You're my peer review, because we are citizens seeking after truth from a biblical and constitutional perspective. Now, what happened was that the kids are learning all these ideological dogmas in all these departments, and then they end up in tech departments, in law departments in Silicon Valley. They're diversity officers at universities. They end up in journalism, of all things. Go figure that. Consider those journalists, and the media, and so on it goes. They go to TV and radio channels, and they're as experts, and they speak in legislators as policymakers, and all of this stuff is on these ideological findings, and they're flawed. They're all flawed, and quite frankly, this author calls it horrific criminal disasters with all these different departments. So anyway, let's go to an example here. Is that they started with a documentary maker from Australia chronicling a project, and the video is in the article, for a year for the future evidence. The trio embarked on writing papers. They did all these other things, written in a matter of hours, with fake names and high-sounding theoretical jargon, intimating feminist, gender, and postmodernist scholarship. And then they sent it off to top-tier sociology, race, and gender journals. Wow, that's pretty cool. And the results were frightening. One published and retracted paper was about dogs dry humping in a dog park, which, when reflected upon, gave feminists an idea on how to train men like they might train dogs. And the paper was entitled, get this, Human Reactions to Rape Culture and Queer Performativity at Urban Dog Parks in Portland, Oregon. And it was published in the journal called Gender, Place, and Culture, a journal of feminist geography. So then there was another paper on fat bodybuilding, which was to legitimize the idea, and published in the Fat Studies Journal. Get that, there's a Fat Studies Journal. Did you know that, Kat? Isn't that crazy? The trio copied the notorious feminist Glaxology paper and wrote exactly similar one, claiming astronomy was a fake science that is Western, patriarchal, and imperialist, and should be replaced with feminist astrology. Wow. What do we got, 2 minutes left, Kat? Yeah, 2.5 minutes. I'll get into some of these others. But, so, hey, you out there in the listening world, why don't you crank up some kind of wacky paper and put some kind of highfalutin title that you're a doctor of, knucklehead science, and write up this whole thing, and, go look at, maybe instead of dogs humping, I don't know, I raise cattle, and quite frankly, you'd see the cows humping from time to time. And, you could write that up, and maybe that's something you send into one of these journals. I don't know. It's pretty disgusting, but this is the degraded level of acceptance. And once again, I refer to what Kathy was reading in Romans 1, is that God allows people to go into their degenerated minds when they don't acknowledge Him, when they won't acknowledge everything that is meaningful, everything that put this country together, everything that was at the root of it from our Puritan father foundation. And yes, even those that went to Virginia and the Anglicans, but soon after came the Presbyterians. We had all of the Dutch Reformed that came into New York. We had the Quakers into Pennsylvania. We had people that were solid in their faith, And they looked at the Bible as absolutely true. None of these people accept anything to do with God. And that is going back to exactly what was being referred to in the liberality in religion. Because when you have liberality in religion, that was even happening there in that early 1800 period, you start getting perversion in society. You can read that in the Old Testament. I mean, come on. And Jesus even talked about it too when he chastised that, teaching leadership and political leadership within those that were in the synagogues. So it really does come down to it. It comes down to, where are we as individuals in a society, in our relationship to a living God? And the real revival is in a reformation within the churches. So that's a whole nother topic. I kind of steer away from that. But you know what? As we come back in the next segment, I want you to remember that Samuel Adams and those anti-federalists, yes, they absolutely got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. And my goodness gracious, we can just look at that predictive nature that the anti-federalists described in mankind. And I always go that the primary difference between the Federalists and the anti-Federalists necessarily was not the whole idea of their political philosophy as much as it was their perspective towards theology, and that the church would stay engaged in culture, politics, education, and they would be engaged in it from a formal biblical Reformation perspective. You got to Madison's mentor, teacher, primary teacher, and tutor for a period of time was none other than John Witherspoon. Great, biblically sound man. Oh my goodness. So Madison, had a lot of ideas that came from that perspective. Whereas the anti-federalists, they were predictably correct in that human nature would take the turns that it does by virtue of being a sinful creature and having rejected God from that point there in the good old Garden of Eden, that maybe the churches won't continue to do their job. Maybe the pulpits won't be able to maintain morality and virtue to the extent that, let's see, what is it, these articles here? Let me go back here. Let's see. This one article, on dogs dry humping in a park. Wow. Geez, that's what the Federalists were talking about for constitutionalism, right? That's what the liberty of mankind in America is all about, is how you take and control men, from that feminist perspective, or this idea of the fat bodybuilding, or these whole ideas that astronomy is no good, and what we need to do is have feminist astrology. Another fake paper that they did was titled "Going In Through the Back Door: Challenging Straight Male Homosteria, Transhysteria, and Transphobia Through Receptive Penetrative Sex Toy Use." And this was published in the journal Sexuality and Culture. Holy smokes. Did I mention in the first segment something about Sodom and Gomorrah? Did I say that those that were pounding on the doors to the gallery there in the Supreme Court building reminded me of those crowds pounding on Lot's house door to take and get in to destroy good and righteous people? I don't know. I'm taken aback that this is acceptable insanities in the universities. But you know what? It's not insanity. It's called sin. It's just flat out what it is. And we've allowed it. And I go back and I will always, comment on this, is that the churches have allowed it. Pastors have allowed it. And they've allowed it by not addressing it within the context of their congregations and keeping culturally involved within the context of the universities, the school systems. And now we're seeing that is being pushed all the way down to pre-kindergarten. Did you know that? That they're pushing all of this transgender stuff all the way down to pre-kindergarten? Where are the pastors? Where are the preachers? Where are the priests? Where are the rabbis that will call down the Lord God and say, you know what? Jesus was right. Jesus was absolutely right that Sodom and Gomorrah will need to be apologized to. Wow. Get that. Anyway, Let's go on to some of these other papers. These other papers were on men masturbating while thinking of women as sexual assault. A paper exploring why men go to Hooters, titled The End. I can't even say that. This is crazy because they put all these highfalutin scientific, cow pie names. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, I do not call things BS because, having raised cattle, you got to understand that BS is nice and tidy plops, man. They're like plop, 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 and they kind of stack up, lean over, they're like these giant pellets, that plop out there. Cow pies are exactly that. They're just a big and this stuff is even worse. This is cows on spring grass. I mean, get the picture in your head. This is just spraying crap all over the place. Anyway, these fancy falutin spring grass sprays are interesting to me. So here's this Hooters article or a paper that went into peer review. An ethnography of restaurant masculinity. Themes of objectification, sexual conquest, male control, and masculine toughness in a sexually objectifying restaurant. It's like, this stuff is like, oh wow, let's make it a long title. So I guess, when I look at the title of my book over here, in that it being, from covenant to the present constitution, that's not very long at all in respect of, titles of this nonsense. Oh my goodness gracious. Anyway, so let's see. The author wrote, as we progressed, we started to realize that just about anything can be made to work so long as it falls within the moral orthodoxy and demonstrates an understanding of the existing literature. So what that means is that, you can build that framework of messaging all based on what are the ideologies of that group think. And that's all they are. That's what socialist communists are. They're groupthink, anti-God, anti-liberty, and domination of thought, perspective. I mean, look, I just read an article this past week also on what was going on in China. So here's something that was happening in China just real quick. And I know we're in the third segment already. Yeah, so I got, 7 minutes? Wow, 7 minutes. All right. So anyway, I got to get to this last thing. But think about this. So, the president of China is out there rooting and tooting that he's all about the military and he's going to take care of the military and he's going to take care of their veterans and he's going to do this, do that, and the other thing. And next thing you know is that Chinese military veterans cannot get their pay. They cannot get medical assistance. In other words, they've been lied to and all of that. So some of them go to Beijing and they try to take and bring that out. And next thing you know, here comes the goon squads from the cities that they lived in to capture them and take them back to their cities because the political elite in those cities don't want the political elite in Beijing to know that they got screwballs that aren't getting their money and aren't getting all of that, and who gives a rip. So what do? They beat them up. They take and they beat up a bunch of old men. Now there's thousands across all of China starting to march and all of that. And what are they doing? They're bringing the police out. They're taking and keeping others from getting together with those that are willing to protest. And yes, they are. They're beating them. So there you go for the thought police. But anyway, let's finally get to this thing here. Let's see. Finally, the article even talks about the most dangerous of all the published papers started to come out. One was about white males in classrooms made to sit in chains as reparation for previous crimes. The authors were asked to revise and resubmit the work because the reviewers did not think it was harsh enough for the men. Wow. The second was authors wrote a paper for notorious feminist journal Hypatia, infamous for publishing papers about why feminists should be like viruses and join disciplines and institutions to disrupt and destroy Western societies from within. This hoax paper essentially rewrote Hitler's Mein Kampf in feminist language. It got accepted in another feminist journal called Aphilia. So let's see. Let's talk about Nazism with all these pink-hatted, what do they call them? The kitty cat hats. I won't even use the obnoxious name for their knit insanity and the way they dress and all of that. So the point is that a hoax paper was written and published in these peer-reviewed journals. And the intent of these peer-reviewed journals is that feminists should be like viruses and join disciplines and institutions to disrupt and destroy Western societies from within. They use Mein Kampf, feminist or feminized, feministized. I don't know. We can make up a new word. They do it all the time, put some kind of narrative to it, if you will. But the whole point is that, geez, Nazi? See, they spin the narrative. They go to what was written in 1811 when you have the terminology and ideas of Christianity spun on its head. Think about Chelsea Clinton saying that it's Christian, to do abortion. Where do you get that in the Bible? Thou shalt not murder. Oh, wow. So there again is a perversion of the whole idea of biblical truth just in, one of the 10 commandments, let alone everything else established in the Word of God. Wow, ladies and gentlemen, what can I do? I wanted to get on to this other Google thing where they are, they have a whole thing out there about really stomping down on your thought process and becoming the thought managers for you. Facebook, obviously, Twitter, obviously. But I was so captured just by this one article, and you got to go check out the reference and then dig and look at each. I don't know if you want to spend the time reading all of these different journal articles, peer review nonsense, but it just goes to prove that if you want to show the level of perversion in education today, this is a great article just to start with. You don't have to go much further than this. So I would take steps, parents that are out there, know what your kids are taking and getting educated with. And quite honestly, I'd say, you know what? As hard as it is, get your kids out of those universities and schools that have any of these programs. And you legislators that are out there, this I will say, we were talking about that BS stuff. Let's not deal with BS. What you need is the big hangers on a bull, okay? You need to get some of those big hangers, and you need to stick those big hangers in a wheelbarrow, and you need to get out there in front, and you need to lead, and you need to cut off the money to all these universities that are doing stuff. But above all of that, above all the graphics that you heard in today's program, and you could go and re-listen to it and watch me on YouTube by going to samueladamsreturns.net, and that way you can see the archive of the program. But above hearing all this graphic insanity, the truth always comes down to exactly what Kath was reading in Romans 1. Are they, is anyone going to be turned over to a reprobate mind? Are you going to acknowledge God for who he is based on biblical Reformation truth, or end up creating your own ideas of religion and liberality in religion and all of that? That's what we see. That's what we have out there, is that we do not have that strong truth on who God is, what he is, and the fact that he is sovereign over everything, and that the only way to get a clear understanding of true knowledge is through an understanding of who Jesus Christ is and what he's done for us. So, you know what? Come on back in that next week when Samuel Adams does return, because you know why? Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right.